Welcome to the AI and Faith podcast. We are a community of expert technologists, professionals, and faith leaders bringing the ancient wisdom of the world's major religions to the ethics of artificial intelligence. Join us on this new journey and welcome to the conversation.
As someone who practices with befriending mortality and how we can learn and grow from learning to make peace with impermanence, is like trying to get rid of pain or grief is like dealing with a water balloon. If you have a water balloon, right? If you press in one corner, the other corner just jumps up and makes havoc.
My name is Pablo Salmones, and I will be your podcast host. Today's episode is a conversation with our expert, Dr. Nikki Mirghafori, recorded in May 2025. In this thought-provoking conversation with Nikki Mirghafori, we explore how artificial intelligence intersects with human emotional pain, in particular under a Buddhist perspective. How can technology help us understand, alleviate, or even exacerbate our inner struggles? With her unique background in AI and contemplative practices, Nikki offers insights into the role of wisdom, compassion, and awareness in an increasingly digital world. Join us for a dialogue that bridges mind and machine, pain and presence, and that challenges our Western thinking by bringing a Buddhist perspective into the discussion. Listen now to our conversation. Nikki is an artificial intelligence scientist and an internationally recognized Buddhist teacher. She serves as a steward and teacher at Spirit Rock Meditation Center, where she is also on the board of directors, and a Dharma teacher at the Insight Meditation Center in Redwood City, California. She teaches with clarity and warmth of topics ranging from mindful leadership to cultivating kindness, with a rare expertise and mindfulness of death. Dr. Mirghafori is widely published in AI, has led international research collaborations as a Berkeley academic, and advised technology startups. She is of Persian heritage, an advocate for wisdom and compassion in daily life, as well as ethical AI in our zeitgeist. Nikki, as I mentioned, it's a true honor and a true pleasure to have you here. And today we will be talking about this incredible intersection of topics, I think, between death and technology. Many examples of human grief, throughout our lives, but certainly one of them, if not the one that's most present in our minds, has to do with when someone passes away, whether we're worried about our own death or that of our loved ones. Before digging deep into some of these questions, I think we can go very deep into some of them. Why don't you tell us, Nikki, first a bit about why this is an interesting topic to you and how you got involved in the overall intersection, of technology and grief, which is, I think, a good introduction. And then perhaps you can give us some examples related to the same, some examples related to AI, grief, and other intersections.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks, Pablo. Thank you for the warm introduction and also setting up the space and the questions. So a bit of background, as you asked. So why am I interested in this intersection of technology, AI, and grief? So as a part of my background, as you read, I've done research in AI when AI was not cool. It was the winter of AI. Yeah, I got my PhD in it. What now? I'm going to date myself. 27 years ago, something like that. I was 5. Yeah, just kidding. So as a technologist, of course, AI has been of interest to me. And also the reason I would say why I studied AI was I was interested in how the mind worked. And I also was interested in problem solving and simulations. So as a computer scientist, it seemed like AI was the best way to try to understand perhaps how the mind works. So with this new wave of AI systems and systems that not try to help us understand how the human mind works, but just simulating it and all the various ethical issues that have come up and continue to come up. So back to personal history. So as a computer scientist now, I'll give you the piece about my interest in death and grief. So I'm also a Buddhist teacher, a lineage holder in Theravada Buddhism, which is the early school of Buddhism, which is footnote primarily where the teachings on mindfulness, secular mindfulness are pulled from and adapted. So as a Buddhist teacher, I teach and practice many different practices, and the practices of what's called Maranasati, mindfulness of death, or translation of that really is, or the English translation could also be, remember that you're going to die. So these practices of befriending and making peace with our own finitude, with our own impermanence, I've seen that these practices have been transformative, both for me and all the students I've been teaching. I've been teaching workshops and classes on mindfulness of death for the past decade and writing a book on it now. How to befriend our mortality, how to make peace with it, so that we can live a life that is meaningful, so that we stay present and not think about later, afterwards, to really live authentically according to our values, with love, with compassion, with forgiveness. So that act of making friends with our mortality and knowing that this is it. It's not like, oh, I'm going to live again, I'm going to live forever. So various, again, we'll get into it maybe today, but it can be transformative in the way that people live and love. Because this is all we know. We have this. So now bring together AI and death, and here in the zeitgeist. Oh yes, and another thing to say is then there is this fear of loss, fear of grief, fear of death. Human beings, we have a difficulty contemplating our own demise. The ego has difficulty, and there are ways to, of course, work with that. But a random person on the street is scared of death, scared of being annihilated. In psychology, there is this whole field called terror management theory. Terror management theory. Don't you love that TMT, terror management theory? So this whole field in psychology, basically the idea, the field started really after 1974 book called The Denial of Death. And the name of author will come to me in a moment. So basically, in that book, he talked about how, as human beings, we are conscious. We know that we're going to die, and we know it's inevitable. And yet, we have this self-preservation instinct, and that creates this pull, this terror that we try to manage by denying death, by various stories that we tell ourselves. There was another great book that I highly recommend by Stephen Cave, the philosopher, called Immortality. And in that, he talks about the 4 immortality stories that we tell ourselves. And the immortality stories, very briefly, are the story of staying alive, that, oh, I won't die. I'll just, the elixir. And in history, there's been the story of Gilgamesh, quest for the flower of life, the alchemical elixirs, etc., etc. The resurrection story, that I will come back to life. Many examples in history, and nowadays the mind uploading and death bots, which we'll get into in a moment. So this, and the other 3 briefly, I'll mention the story of the soul and the story of legacy. So basically, terror management theory, we tell ourselves these stories and we try to deny death. And really, it's instead of turning towards it and making peace with it. So now bring this tendency of being afraid of death, being afraid of loss, being afraid of pain, instead of befriending and knowing skillfully how to work with it and how to learn from it. And then here you come in this digital zeitgeist with AI and these historic stories of staying alive. For example, they repeat themselves. Instead of the elixir of life, or say the breath control, now we have the Silicon Valley Immortalist projects and the cryonics of freezing our brains and bodies. That actually, there are companies that are doing this. And coming back especially to the question of AI, with this sense that, oh, I'm not going to die. There will be this twin of mine continuing to live and continue to make decisions, and even more so for the family members. And I'll give a few examples of what kinds of grief and death technology actually exists already. This is not science fiction anymore. We can pay as little as $10 in one of these companies that I'm going to name and start creating your own grief bot. So
there's just so much to talk about. And, when I was listening to your different interviews and your different podcasts that you've made throughout these years, precisely something came to mind. I mean, as you just mentioned, throughout millennia, we have been, as a species, as human beings, figuring out a way to go beyond, if you will, right? To go beyond death. Sometimes it's through religion, sometimes it's through art, sometimes it's through, well, one of the very many tools that as human beings we have, or one of the very many parts of ourselves that we've tried to use to go beyond that, to transcend in some way. As you were saying, we have kind of like this consciousness of our own death, but at the same time we have, of course, a feeling of self-preservation, both I think as individuals and as a species, right? We have it on both ways. But interestingly, precisely in the era of AI, we have kind of like a new trend, if you will, of how to precisely go beyond that and transcend that. We have people talking about uploading consciousness to some sort of AI, whatever consciousness means, because that's in itself a very tough, difficult question. But we've got people talking about that. I actually remembered when I was listening to your interviews. I think it was last year actually, when I was on a TV show here in Mexico. I was precisely talking about people who were bringing their loved ones back from the death, if you will, by precisely recording themselves or their loved ones before they're passing away. And then, I mean, some guys were even talking at the person who had passed away during their funeral. Like they were asking questions to the lady who had passed away, doing her own funeral. By having a 3D projection and having someone who had stored
Right. Yeah. I have
previously the
those examples. Actually, I'm going to tell you exactly what those are. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I was just listening to some of that. Beyond, I mean, the examples, our relationship, both as individuals and as a species, with death. Do you envision that changing in the era of
Yeah.
AI, or do you think it's just an enhancement of what has
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
happening? Is there a new meaning to death? Is there not a new meaning? So how do you see all that?
Pablo, what you just said, there were so many points to unpack. So I'm so much you said I need to
Yeah.
unpack. So I'm not going to go to the punchline, but I'm going to go earlier and walk through it because there's so much. So one is really this notion of historically the transcendence of death. So I would not use the word transcendence really. For example, throughout history, human beings, unfortunately, have engaged in war and continue to engage in war. It doesn't make war okay. So just the fact that human beings have they've been afraid of death, they've been fearful of their annihilation, and they've been trying to refuse it, it doesn't make it okay. It creates lots of ethical issues, as I'm going to be talking about in a moment with death bots. So using the word transcendence here is not a skillful use of the word. So I really want to highlight that. It's more as I'm reframing and shaping it here, the conversation in terms of terror management theory and the fear and terror and the denial of death that we have. We've been resisting death or resisting the idea of death instead of befriending it. So that's a very important framing I just want to highlight to frame the conversation. That's first. And then with the question of consciousness, etc., again, that's another question. That's an orthogonal question. And these mind uploading in various death bots that are available, they don't even approach the question of consciousness. And that I want to put at the end and get to it at the end of the conversation, if we may. That's a whole other can of worms on consciousness. So let's bracket that also. Okay, now let's come back to the examples and let me unpack some of the examples so that folks have a better sense of what's already out there, and then go to the question that you posed at the end, which is a lovely question about, okay, how are these technologies perhaps shaping and making our relationship with death different? So that's the order in which I like to attend to it. So to give a better sense of the examples that are out there right now, there's quite a continuum. It's not just one series. You can think of the continuum of digital legacy and memorialization that already, for example, Facebook allows you to do that. You can have the memorial wall of photos and videos, and after someone dies, they're still active. So that's on a kind of a low tech end of it. And then there is, on the next level, I would say there are the AI grief bots or dead bots. This is an interesting and rich area that I want to talk a little more about. So, for example, there is a company Hereafter AI, and it's a smartphone app that interviews you now and lets your heirs chat with you with your future avatar. There's another company called Rememory, and they create a photoreal avatar of you. And actually, this is the one that maybe you saw in Mexico. The Korean funeral homes also have a kiosk. You just give them a photo and a 10-second video clip. That's all it takes. A one photo, 10-second video, a voice clip, sorry, 10-second voice clip, not even video clip, 10-second voice clip. And then they can create these videos, and I've seen them. They're creepy. You can just go to the website and you can give them a script, a 20-minute script that then this avatar can read at the funeral, for example. There's Project December. Again, this is the one you can start for as little as $10 that spins up a text-only bot of anyone living or dead, so that when they've died, so for example, if say your friend has died, you can create an avatar of them starting at $10 and have a conversation with them. And then maybe I'll mention a couple of more, maybe one more. There's you, comma, only virtual, YOV. Here's another company. And this company creates a persona that keeps messaging and calling family and friends after it's passed. So for example, the way this one works is, say your mom has passed and you create this persona of them, and then the persona of your mom calls you, and you call them and you have conversations. And in fact, I found this quote by the CEO of the company who says, "Our goal is to get rid of the pain of grief." To me, again, as someone who practices with befriending mortality, and how we can learn and grow from learning to make peace with impermanence, is like trying to get rid of pain of grief is like dealing with a water balloon. If you have a water balloon, right? If you press in one corner, the other corner just jumps up and makes havoc. I want to say a little about some of the positive aspects and then some of the challenges, and then get to the question that you asked, which is the juicy question. I'm building my way to it, Pablo. So to speak about some of the benefits. So some of the benefits, one is therapeutic support. So there is a small study, a small number of people tested in this. So the N was very small. Clinical pilot that showed that short-term relief, when bots are framed as temporary, just temporary, actually brought relief. So it can be helpful to have these bots in a limited time, but not as to build dependence. So in terms of companionship, narrative reconstruction, and gradual exposure for complicated grief. Also could be helpful for family history, for interactive archives for descendants, could be very helpful for reviving endangered languages and oral histories for cultural preservations. These kinds of death bots could be helpful, or also, this is an interesting one I found, for clarifying wishes and preserving knowledge. For example, it's predicted that in 2026, estate planning platforms will have these death bots integrated, so that if there's any disputes about what the estate wants, there would be clarity. So now, ethical challenges. Okay, here we go. Prolonged grief disorder, reality confusion, dependence, psychological issues. So many psychological issues in this case. And again, the simile of a balloon, a water balloon, you may be trying to get rid of grief, but actually you're going to prolong grief and have reality confusion and build dependence. And also there is lack of clarity about data ownership. Who owns the data? Does the company own the data now? How about lack of consent? The person who passed away, did they give consent for their data to be used in these ways? And how about the other persons in the family? So having a death bot, maybe in a family, one sister loves it, but another sister is totally creeped out by it and thinks it's awful. And it's best to have just say goodbye to mom and that's it. And every time this death bot comes up during a family reunion, their grief is refreshed. So mutual consent, so important in this case. A commercial exploitation, subscription models monetize bereavement. Oh my heavens, right? That's one area hasn't been monetized in other ways. But here now, how about monthly subscriptions? And ad targeting inside these bots. I mean, imagine so many ethical, even without getting into religious concerns, but these general ethical concerns. And then how about accuracy and hallucinations? How about if these bots could have false memories, or maybe they share some memories that deceased loved one didn't want to be shared. So they might have a defamatory output. They might hallucinate and say, the death bot might say, "Oh, I'm in hell now." What does the family supposed to do with that kind of hallucination or defamatory output that's given by this death bot? Then there is security, identity theft, ransomware of digital ghosts, and of course the spiritual and cultural, and this aspect leads into the question you asked that I'm building towards, because I think all this background needs to be there, which is the dilution of mourning rituals. So the sense of really now coming to some of these aspects, some of these challenges of, say, a finality, right? We've considered death to be this closure, this goodbye. Of course, grief. We work through grief. We have ways, but if there's an avatar, if there is a way to keeping that person alive and not really dealing with saying goodbye, and is this avatar really them now, or is it a copy of them? Is it really them? If it's really them, does it deserve its own rights, its own privileges under the law? So many, many complications. So I'm going to take a pause for a moment and go to the last question that you asked, which is how might AI now shift and change the way that we think about death in this age? Is our relationship to death shifting? Is it going to shift even more? So, the heart of your great and juicy question is to consider that in many ways, technologies always amplify the existing tendencies that we have as human beings. So, they can help us see impermanence more vividly, or they can seduce us into denying it. So, in this case, because we have this tendency to want to deny impermanence, and also coming from a Buddhist perspective where making friends and really embracing impermanence is one of the ways that you find peace, that this is the way things are, this is the way life is, it is impermanent. So grief bots and avatars can serve as transitional objects. So they can be a gentle ramp into acceptance if they're clearly framed as simulations and time bound. But without a skillful framing, they can risk strengthening the clinging that we have to this sense of permanence. And in Buddhism, this the clinging, which is the source of suffering, when you cling to something and you don't accept it. And they can delay the natural task of integrating loss. So it's also one trouble here, as I was referring to a bit earlier, is that historically death has been seen as a boundary condition that grounds ethics and urgency. And both the sense of finality, that this is the amount of time that I have to live, and how do I live it skillfully with compassion, with kindness, with love, and also with urgency. There's very little time. I don't want to waste my time. There's very little time to waste. So now, if AI is going to offer this apparent workaround that you can continue to live, and also some examples that I did not talk about, and the more advanced, they're also called these generative ghosts. So the idea here is that this is basically a version of you that keeps on living. So that's another more advanced than the death bots. So if again, with these generative ghosts, this boundary condition is now not quite a boundary condition. So what is going to motivate a meaningful life when the end point feels negotiable, when this generative ghost, and some people hypothesize that these generative ghosts can keep on, quote unquote, existing after you've died. They can continue to work and create and even generate income after you have died. So if that boundary condition is not met anymore of you dying, then what is death? So that brings a contemplative question. And from the Buddhist view, the genuine meaning arises not from evading limits, but from intimacy with them. So one last thing I'm going to say here is there is an opportunity for contemplative design. So if we imagine grief support bots that end each session with mindfulness of death or memento mori, remember that you're going to die, or that they retire themselves after 49 days, which is the Tibetan Bardo period, the 49 days. So you can have the support and then they go away. That could be a way to actually bring some support in. So there's so much in there. I'm going to pass it back to you.
Yeah, there is certainly so much there. And I was just thinking, now that you were mentioning all this, I think it's also not only about how it redefines, perhaps not redefines, but how it will affect, as you're saying, our relationship with death, given that perhaps, as you're saying, the final point is negotiable, right? The end apparently is now negotiable, or could be in any way. But it's also, I think, about how it modifies our relationships with our loved ones, or ones that are alive. I mean, because if, and goes back to living a meaningful life, as you're saying, because I mean, if your loved ones may continue at some point to actually live or may continue to be in some sort of way, then, well, how does it modify their relationship with those loved ones, right? Because there are many people, I think, that when a friend passes away or something, a very close person passes away, they say, oh, I wish I could have asked that person this, that I could have spent more time with this person. And now perhaps that's not even the case, right? As people may continue to live in some other way. So I think it also modifies our relationship with our loved ones that are actually here, in our world. But anyway, I don't want to go deep into that
Yeah,
because
yeah, no,
otherwise
actually,
we're
wait, actually, I'm gonna no, let's just pause there because that's a really good point. So, so,
yeah.
so again, I think this is human nature, but
Mhm.
frankly, the solution is not to then try to create a bot and try to make up for
Of
actually what
course.
you didn't do, but to say, okay, well, I do have friends and relatives who are alive, and I'm not spending enough time with them. Let that pain be alive in you to motivate you to live more presently and authentically while you actually can. However, I mean, there are again skillful cases of having a child, for example, who's just lost a mother and having a supported, attended, a therapeutic session so that they can have a gentle goodbye with a parent they never got to say goodbye to. But not in the way, oh, well, I screwed up. I never called my mom. So now I'm going to like just like, well, sweetheart, yeah, there's other practices for that. There's practice of forgiveness. There are practices of there are other ways that your heart needs to grow instead of
Mhm.
technologically trying to make up for, which is not really makeup. You're not really calling them. You're just making yourself feel better.
Certainly, there's much to reflect on there, but I wanted to ask you something which we rarely have the opportunity in some cases. In many different parts of the world, there's different ways of facing death, and different cultures face it in a different way as well. Here in Mexico, for example, during the Day of the Dead, we actually make fun of death, right? We laugh at it, we enjoy time with our loved ones, and we create short poems. I don't know if there's actually a right translation of that. They're called calaveritas. I don't think it's like a poem, but it's meant to be funny and to make fun of death, trying to take your loved ones away. And somehow ingenuity will actually make death want to run away from your loved ones. There are several ways of facing it, right? And I think that many times, Nikki, we're used to the Western view of things, if you will, to the Western view of, again, in the West, there are many different views, of course, but we're kind of more used to that side. Whereas we're not as used to learning from the Eastern world and having a different perspective, that's coming from the Eastern world. I don't want to go without asking you, what are some of the things that you see in daily life and the way we want to face these different challenges of death? What do you think here in the Western world we could learn from Eastern practices, and in particular from Buddhism? And what are some contrasts that you see between these two currents?
Yeah, yeah, great. Wonderful question. Thank you, Pablo. And also, I so appreciate that you brought in the Day of the Dead that you celebrate with your family. It's just so wonderful. I love, as you would guess, I love the Day of the Dead. And it actually, the Day of the Dead is a way that the Western culture is really showing how Eastern-like or Buddhist-like intimacy with death by I haven't so much thought about it as laughing at death, but it's befriending death. It's normalizing death. Like it's
Mhm.
okay. It's part of life. It's going to the cemetery and having a picnic. It's like this is part of life. This is part of life. So there are a few things I'll mention. One aspect, I'll mention a few aspects, and the predominant Western framing, and then the Eastern or the Buddhist framing, and what the West might integrate. So I'll go through these different aspects of it, unpacking it in this way. One is the aspect of selfhood. And the predominant Western framing is that the individual soul, that the self persists. And in the Buddhist frame, the self is a dynamic, is not fixed, but it's as dynamic aggregates. It's a process that is co-created by all the causes and conditions that come together to make a being in this moment and fall away. So there's not so much a center or homunculus. So, what the West might integrate is the practice of seeing a self or identity as a process. And in this way, it reduces the fear of its dissolution. Because if you think there's this self, there's this center, it's going to die, like, it brings about so much fear. But if you see it as a process that's come together and come together the same way that, say, a fruit comes together from the earth and the seed and the sun and the water and all of these causes that create something to be. And Thich Nhat Hanh teaches about this beautifully, this idea of interbeing. Another aspect I want to talk about is ritual, for example, the goal of ritual. And the Western framing tends to be future oriented as in salvation or resurrection or legacy. Whereas the Eastern or the Buddhist framing tends to be the liberation from the cycles of clinging, from the cycles of wanting and clinging and suffering and the samsara and the coming and going and coming and going. And there's something about the Buddhist framing that focuses on the present moment awareness, the present right here, right now, and ethical action and actions and awareness right here, right now, instead of pushing, shifting the focus to after death, after what's going to happen after I die. It's like right here, right now, ethical conduct and the seeds of that. So that's another potential area. And then there's the attitude towards loss. And the Western framing tends to be one of fighting, defeat, like fighting cancer, or oh, so and so lost their fight with this illness, and death is sanitized. Whereas in the Eastern context, death is normalized. There's meditations in charnel ground where the monks are advised to go and meditate on decomposing bodies. And also, for example, in a very Buddhist country of Thailand, where the idea of death being natural, it's actually a saying in the culture, this is normal, this is natural. And what the West might integrate, as you've asked, is encouraging death literacy and honest dialogues, for example, in death cafes, to really incorporating death into the culture. I'll mention one more thing, and this is kind of, again, it's a slightly different frame. And I think in the Western frame there is this hope in the external redemption, whereas in the Eastern frame there is a acceptance of what is through direct contemplation. So integrating, say, contemplative practices of presence, of mindfulness, of death, and also Tonglen, which is another practice of active compassion, into palliative care is another idea.
Something that I'd like everyone here to live with is precisely these different perspectives that we have from different parts of the world. And that in a process like grieving, the death of someone, there's many ways to face it, to in some case accept it, it's part of life. And again, there's just so many ways to, I think, deal with something that's so inherently human. Thank you so much, Nikki. It's been an honor to have you here. It's been an honor to listen to the wisdom that you've shared with us, to the perspectives that you've shared with us. And we hope to see you very soon.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Great to see you.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Stay tuned to listen to more recordings and interviews with experts from around the world. In the meantime, follow and rate our podcast on your favorite podcast platform and share with your friends. Don't forget to follow us on our social media as well. We're on LinkedIn, X, and Blue Sky. Thank you for joining us today.